Julian Blackwood thought he was untouchable. He was the CEO who had it all: the billion-dollar tech empire, the sprawling Hamptons estate, and the 24-year-old supermodel fiancée. But his ego needed one final stroke. As a cruel joke, he invited Emma, the boring ex-wife he'd discarded 3 years ago, to watch him get remarried. He expected her to be a no-show, or worse, a weeping mess in the back row. He wanted her to see what she had lost. But when the chapel doors opened, Julian didn't see a broken woman. He saw a nightmare wrapped in red silk. And by the time the reception was over, the groom wouldn't just be single, he'd be ruined. The invitation was heavy. It was printed on cream-colored cardstock so thick it felt like a slab of marble, with the letters embossed in actual 24-karat gold leaf. It smelled of expensive cedar and arrogance. Julian Blackwood sat in the corner office of Blackwood Industries, located on the top floor of the tallest spire in Manhattan, spinning the envelope between his fingers. He let out a low, rumbling chuckle that lacked any genuine warmth. "You're not actually going to send that, are you?" Silas Thorne, Julian's COO and best man, swirled his scotch in a crystal tumbler, looking at his friend with a mixture of amusement and hesitation. Silas was a shark in a suit, but even he had limits. "Why wouldn't I?" Julian asked, tossing the envelope onto the mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "Emma deserves to know. I'm doing her a courtesy." "Closure, Silas. It's all about closure." "Closure," Silas scoffed, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park. "Julian, you divorced the woman 3 years ago because she didn't fit the brand. You left her with the house in Connecticut and a modest settlement, and you haven't spoken a word to her since. Inviting her to your wedding to Bianca. That's not closure, that's hunting for sport." Julian leaned back in his leather Eames chair, clasping his hands behind his head. He looked every bit the master of the universe he believed himself to be. At 45, he was fitter than most 20-year-olds thanks to a team of personal trainers and a strictly regulated diet. His hair was silvering perfectly at the temples, giving him a distinguished wolf-like appearance. "She was dragging me down, Silas, you remember? She wore those awful cardigans. She wanted to talk about gardening and book clubs. She had no ambition. I'm about to launch the IPO of the decade. I need Bianca on my arm. Bianca is vitality. She's the future. Emma was the past." Julian stood up, buttoning his Tom Ford suit jacket. He walked over to the desk, picked up a fountain pen, and scribbled a note on the back of the RSVP card inside Emma's invitation. "Come see what happiness actually looks like. Best, Jay." "It's a joke, Silas," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "She won't come. She doesn't have the spine. She's probably still crying into her herbal tea in that drafty house wearing sweatpants. But the invitation, it reminds her of her place. It reminds her that I won." He buzzed his assistant. "Sarah, take this to the mailroom. Urgent courier. I want it hand-delivered to the residence of Ms. Emma Vance." As the assistant scurried away with the envelope, Silas shook his head. "You're playing with fire, Julian. You haven't seen her in 3 years. People change." "Emma," Julian laughed, pouring himself a drink. "Emma doesn't change. She fades. That's all she ever did." 3 months later, the day of the wedding arrived. It was styled to be the social event of the decade. The venue was the St. Jude's Cathedral in the city, followed by a reception at the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza. The press had been buzzing about the union of Julian Blackwood and Bianca St. Clair for weeks. Bianca was everything Emma wasn't. At 24, she was an Instagram sensation turned model, though no one could quite recall which campaigns she had starred in. She was vibrant, loud, and obsessed with the spotlight. She was also, as Silas had privately noted, burning through Julian's liquidity at a terrifying rate. In the bridal suite, Bianca was screaming. "I said lilies of the valley, not white roses," she shrieked, throwing a bouquet across the room. It hit a terrified makeup artist in the shoulder. "Do you know how much this dress cost? If I hold roses, it ruins the silhouette." Julian stood in the doorway, checking his watch. "Bianca, darling, calm down. It's just flowers." She whipped around, her eyes manic. It's not just flowers, Julian. It's the aesthetic Vogue is going to be here. If this looks cheap, I look cheap. Julian felt a tiny flicker of irritation. In the past, Emma had handled crises with a quiet, soothing grace. When his mother had died right before a board meeting, Emma had silently handed him a fresh tie and held his hand until the shaking stopped. He pushed the thought away. Emma was weak, he reminded himself. Bianca is fiery. Fire is good. Fix it! Julian barked at the wedding planner, then turned to leave. As he walked down the hallway toward the groom's waiting area, he ran into Silas. Silas looked pale. You look like you've seen a ghost, Julian joked, adjusting his cufflinks. Cold feet. You're not the one getting married. Julian, Silas said, his voice low, I just checked the guest list check-ins with security at the front gate. And, she's here. Julian paused. Who? Emma. A slow, predatory smile spread across Julian's face. She actually came. I didn't think she had the guts. Julian, you don't understand. Silas started looking nervously toward the entrance. The security guy, he said she didn't come alone, and he said she didn't pull up in a cab. What did she rent a limo? Julian laughed. Trying to keep up appearances with the alimony I pay her. She arrived in a customized Bentley State limousine, Julian, the kind usually reserved for royalty. And the man she's with, security didn't recognize him, but they said he looks like he owns the pavement he walks on. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned tighter this time. Probably a rental. She's bluffing. She wants a reaction. Well, she's going to get one. I'm going to make sure she has a front row seat to the happiest day of my life. He clapped Silas on the shoulder. Let's go. It's showtime. The cathedral was packed. 500 of New York's elite sat in the pews. Tech moguls, politicians, socialites, and hungry journalists with their pens poised. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft murmur of gossip. Julian stood at the altar looking every inch the king. He nodded to his business rivals, acknowledging their presence with a smug tilt of his chin. He wanted them all to witness this. This was his victory lap. The organ music began to swell, signaling the start of the processional. The bridesmaids, dressed in shimmering gold that cost more than most cars, began their walk. But Julian's eyes weren't on the aisle. They were scanning the crowd. He wanted to find her. He wanted to see Emma sitting alone wearing some drab gray dress, looking small and defeated. He wanted to lock eyes with her and smirk. He scanned the rows. The first few rows were reserved for family, what little he had, and key investors. The middle rows were friends and associates. The back, there. In the third row on the bride's side, a deliberate choice, no doubt there was a gap. People were whispering, leaning away from a figure seated near the aisle. Julian squinted. The light filtering through the stained glass was multicolored and hazy. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral creaked. It wasn't time for the bride yet. The bridesmaids were still walking. The noise caused heads to turn. The timing was all wrong. It was a breach of etiquette that made the wedding planner gasp audibly from the side wing. A silhouette stepped into the frame of the open doors. It wasn't Bianca. The figure paused, letting the sunlight from the outside world halo around them for a dramatic second before stepping into the nave. The silence that fell over the room was instantaneous and suffocating. It was a woman. But it wasn't the woman Julian remembered. Emma Vance moved down the side aisle, not with the shuffled, apologetic gait of the housewife he had divorced, but with the liquid, dangerous grace of a panther. She was wearing red. Not a modest dark burgundy, but a vibrant blood-red silk gown that clung to her body like a second skin. It was backless, plunging dangerously low, revealing muscles Julian didn't know she possessed. The dress was clearly haute couture, likely a custom design, structured yet flowing. Her hair, which used to be pulled back in a messy practical bun, now cascaded in glossy chestnut waves down her bare back. Her face? God, her face looked 10 years younger. The tiredness was gone. Her skin glowed. Her lips were painted a matte crimson that matched the dress. She didn't look at the floor. She looked straight ahead. And she wasn't alone. On her arm was a man who made Julian Blackwood look like a junior associate. He was tall, well over 6'3", with shoulders that strained the fabric of a suit that cost more than Julian's car. He had dark skin, piercing eyes, and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He walked with a military precision, his hand resting possessively yet protectively on the small of Emma's back. "Who is that?" someone whispered loudly in the front row. "Is that Emma? My God, she looks incredible!" The whispers grew into a hum. The bridesmaids, confused by the shift in attention, faltered in their steps. Julian felt a cold spike of adrenaline in his chest. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to be the dowdy ghost at the feast, not the main attraction. Emma and her mystery escort didn't take a seat in the back. They walked confidently toward the front. The usher, a young boy clearly terrified by the man's imposing aura, scrambled to get out of their way. They stopped at the third row. Emma turned, and for the first time her eyes locked with Julian's. There was no sadness in them, no longing, no anger. There was only amusement. She offered him a small, polite nod, the kind one gives to a waiter who has brought the wrong order, and then sat down. The man beside her sat crossing his legs and fixing Julian with a stare that felt like a physical weight. Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back. The narrative was slipping. He was the main character. She was the footnote. Why was everyone looking at her? Suddenly the organ music swelled loudly, a desperate attempt by the organist to regain control of the room. The "Here Comes the Bride" march began. The guests hurriedly turned their heads back toward the main aisle, but the energy had shifted. The anticipation was gone, replaced by curiosity about the woman in red. Bianca appeared at the end of the aisle. She looked stunning objectively. Her dress was a massive cloud of lace and diamonds, but as she walked she noticed the guests weren't looking at her with undivided adoration. Their eyes kept darting to the side, to the woman in red. Bianca's smile faltered. She saw Julian at the altar. He wasn't looking at her with love. He was glaring past her, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on something behind her shoulder. Bianca reached the altar. She took her place beside Julian. "Who is she?" Bianca hissed through her teeth, keeping her smile plastered on for the cameras. "Ignore her." Julian muttered, his voice tight. "Just say the lines." The priest began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Julian tried to focus. He tried to lock into the moment, but he could feel Emma's presence like a heat source. He could feel the whispers of the crowd. If anyone can show just cause why this couple may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The priest paused. It was a rhetorical pause. Nobody ever spoke. The silence stretched for a second. Then a low, distinct cough echoed from the third row. It wasn't an objection. It was just a clearing of the throat. But it came from the man sitting next to Emma. Julian's head snapped toward them. The man checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that Julian recognized as a limited edition, one he had been on a waiting list for 2 years to get. The man whispered something to Emma. Emma smiled. A genuine, dazzling smile. She reached out and adjusted the man's tie, completely ignoring the fact that her ex-husband was standing at the altar. The disrespect was palpable. It was a masterclass in indifference. Julian felt a vein throb in his temple. He wanted to scream. He wanted to demand they be thrown out. But he couldn't. Not with the press here. Not with the investors watching. He had invited her. He had opened the door. And Emma had just kicked it off its hinges. "I do," Julian said, but the words tasted like ash. As he kissed his new bride, the applause was polite but scattered. Julian's eyes were open. He watched as Emma didn't clap. She simply stood up, smoothed her red dress, and turned to her partner. They began to walk toward the exit before the couple had even walked back down the aisle. "She's leaving," Bianca whispered, confused. "She didn't even stay for the recessional." "She's going to the reception." Julian said, his voice dropping to a growl. "She's not done. I know her." He was right. Emma wasn't done. The ceremony was just the appetizer. The real show and the real destruction was waiting at the plaza. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a cavern of gold-leaf crystal chandeliers and white orchids. It was a masterpiece of excess. Julian had spent $400,000 on the flowers alone. The air smelled of expensive lilies and truffle oil, but the atmosphere was brittle. Julian stood by the ice sculpture, a 6-foot replica of the Eiffel Tower, a nod to where he had proposed to Bianca, clutching a glass of scotch so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside him, Bianca was posing for photos with a group of influencers, her laughter loud and brittle. She was trying too hard. She could feel the attention of the room drifting like a tide pulling away from the shore. "Smile, Julian," Bianca hissed through her teeth as a photographer from Vanity Fair approached. "You look like you're at a funeral." "I'm smiling," Julian lied. He bared his teeth. His eyes were scanning the room. He hadn't seen Emma since the church. For a hopeful 20 minutes he thought she had gone home. Maybe the church display was all she had in her. Maybe she had made her point and retreated to safety. Then the double doors swung open. The chatter in the room didn't stop, but it dipped in volume, a wave of hushed tones rippling from the entrance toward the head table. Emma had arrived. She had removed a matching silk shawl she must have worn for the transit, leaving her shoulders bare and gleaming under the chandelier light. The red dress seemed to absorb the light, making her the focal point of the entire room. But it was the way the staff reacted that chilled Julian. The maitre d', a man known for his snobbish rigidity, practically ran to greet them. He bowed low, lower than he had bowed for Julian, and gestured them not to the obscure table near the kitchen where Julian had assigned Emma, but toward a VIP table near the dance floor. "What is he doing?" Julian snapped, stepping forward. "That's not her seat." Silas appeared at his elbow, looking more haggard than before. He had a tablet in his hand. "Let it go, Julian." "She's sitting at the Sterling table," Julian hissed. "That table is for Senator Sterling and the board of directors. You can't put my ex-wife with the senator." "The senator invited them to sit," Silas said quietly. Julian froze. "What?" "I saw it. Senator Sterling walked up to the guy she's with, shook his hand like they were old war buddies, and pulled a chair out for Emma himself." "Julian, the guy she's with, I made some calls." Julian finally looked at the man beside Emma. In the warm light of the ballroom, he was even more imposing. He wore his tuxedo with a casual indifference that screamed old money. He was currently laughing at something the senator said, a relaxed, deep laugh that made the people at the surrounding tables lean in, desperate to be part of the joke. "Who is he?" Julian demanded. "Some actor, a gigolo she hired." Silas swallowed hard. "His name is Dante Cassian." The name hit Julian like a physical blow to the gut. He dropped his hand, the scotch sloshing over the rim. "Cassian," Julian repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "The venture capitalist, the one who bought out Titan Tech last month." "The same," Silas said grimly. "They call him the Silent Reaper in the Valley. He doesn't go to parties. He doesn't do press. Nobody really knew what he looked like because he scrubs his photos from the net. But that's him. He's worth 10 times what you are, Julian. Maybe 20. Julian stared across the room. Dante Cassian. The man was a myth in the business world. He was the kind of money that didn't just buy companies. He bought countries' debt. And somehow Emma, the woman who used to clip coupons for organic kale, was sitting with his hand resting on the back of her chair. "This is a setup," Julian muttered. "She's trying to psych me out before the IPO." "It's working," Silas pointed out. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ's voice boomed, interrupting Julian's spiraling thoughts. "Please welcome to the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Julian Blackwood." The spotlight hit the center of the floor. Julian forced a smile onto his face. He took Bianca's hand. Her palm was sweaty. "Who is she looking at?" Bianca whispered furiously as they walked to the center of the floor. "Why is everyone looking at that table?" "Just dance," Julian ordered. The music began, a modern slow ballad Bianca had chosen. They began to sway. It was a choreographed routine practiced for weeks. A dip here, a twirl there. It was technically perfect but entirely soulless. Julian was going through the motions, his eyes darting over Bianca's shoulder every time he spun her. He was watching Emma. She wasn't watching him. She was whispering something to Dante, who was peeling a grape for her. The intimacy of the gesture, so casual, so domestic, made Julian's blood boil. Then the music shifted. The ballad faded, transitioning into a faster, more classic jazz number for the guests to join in. "Join the bride and groom," the DJ encouraged. Usually there is a hesitation. People are shy. Not tonight. Before Julian and Bianca could even finish their bow, Dante Cassian stood up. He offered his hand to Emma. She took it, and they glided onto the floor. If Julian and Bianca's dance had been a choreographed routine, Dante and Emma's was a conversation in motion. They moved with a fluidity that was mesmerizing. Dante led with effortless power, and Emma followed with a sharp, vibrant energy. They spun, her red dress flaring out like a blooming rose, cutting a swath of color through the sea of black and white. Couples who had stepped onto the floor stopped moving just to watch them. Julian stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, Bianca clinging to his arm. They were being eclipsed at their own wedding. "Do something," Bianca whined, sensing the humiliation. But Julian couldn't move. As Emma spun past him, she laughed, a clear bell-like sound that he hadn't heard in years. She looked radiant. She looked expensive. She looked at Julian as she whirled by, and for a second the smile didn't drop, but her eyes went cold. She mouthed two words to him, clear as day. "Nice tie." It was the tie she had bought him 5 years ago. The one he had thrown in the trash when he moved out, calling it cheap. He had fished it out later for reasons he couldn't explain and decided to wear it today for luck. She knew. She saw everything. "I need a drink," Julian said, shaking Bianca off his arm. "You can't leave me here." "Go take a selfie," he snapped, storming off the floor. By the time the main course, Chilean sea bass with saffron foam, was served, Julian Blackwood was 3 scotches deep and vibrating with rage. He sat at the head table, tapping his fork against the china. The room was buzzing, and he knew exactly what they were talking about. They weren't talking about Blackwood Industries' upcoming IPO. They were talking about Dante Cassian and the mystery woman in red. Julian watched as the CEO of ArcLight Systems, a man Julian had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months, walked past the head table without a glance and kneeled next to Emma's chair to kiss her hand. "That's it." Julian slammed his glass down. "Julian, sit down," Silas hissed from the next seat. "Don't make a scene." "It's my wedding, Silas. I can do whatever the hell I want." Julian stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He smoothed his hair. He walked off the dais and cut a straight line across the room toward table 1. The conversation at the table died as he approached. Senator Sterling looked up surprised. Dante Cassian didn't even look up. He was cutting his steak with surgical precision. Emma looked up. She dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and set it down. "Julian," she said. Her voice was calm, smoky. "Lovely ceremony. The priest was very enthusiastic." "Emma," Julian said, ignoring the pleasantries. He stood over them, trying to use his height to intimidate. "I see you got my invitation." "I did," she smiled. "It was so thoughtful. Come see what happiness looks like. I believe that was the note." "I'm glad you came," Julian said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I see you brought a +1. I don't recall giving you a +1. Dante finally stopped cutting his steak. He placed the knife and fork down slowly. The sound of the silver hitting the porcelain was quiet, yet it silenced the immediate area. He looked up. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely unimpressed. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Dante said. His voice was a deep baritone that commanded attention. "Dante Cassian." He didn't stand up. He didn't offer his hand. "I know who you are," Julian snapped. "I'm just wondering why you're at my wedding with my ex-wife." "Emma invited me," Dante said simply. "She said she had an appointment to view a train wreck and she didn't want to watch it alone." A few people at the table gasped. Senator Sterling choked on his wine. Julian's face turned crimson. "Listen here, Cassian. I don't care how much money you have. This is a private event." And Emma, "Frankly, I'm surprised you could afford the plane ticket. Or did Mr. Cassian pay for that too? Is that the arrangement?" It was a low blow, a disgusting insinuation. Emma didn't flinch. She simply picked up her wine glass, swirled the Pinot Noir, and looked at the light through the liquid. "Oh, Julian," she sighed, sounding bored. "You always did have a problem with valuation. You never really understood the worth of things. Only the price. What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Emma said, setting the glass down and locking eyes with him, "that you assumed I was destitute because I didn't fight you for your money during the divorce. You thought I was weak, but I didn't want your money, Julian. I have my own." Julian laughed, a bark of disbelief. "Your own? You were a librarian, Emma. You have a checking account and a Honda." "I was a librarian," Emma corrected. "And before that I was a double major in cryptography and economics. You just never asked." She leaned forward. "Did you really think I spent those 3 years just gardening? I developed a little algorithm, Julian. A predictive model for high-frequency trading. I called it the Phoenix. Maybe you've heard of it." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The Phoenix algorithm. It was the tech that had revolutionized the market 2 years ago. It had been sold to a private holding company for $4 billion. The creator had remained anonymous. "You," Julian whispered. "That's impossible." "Dante bought it," Emma said, gesturing to the man beside her. "That's how we met. He was the only one who understood the code." Dante smiled a sharp, shark-like grin. "Best investment I ever made, and I don't mean the software." He placed his hand over Emma's. Julian felt like the floor was tilting. His ex-wife wasn't just fine. She wasn't just dating a billionaire. She was a billionaire. She was likely richer than he was. "I don't believe you," Julian stammered. "You're lying. You're trying to humiliate me." "I don't have to try, Julian," Emma said softly. "You're doing a wonderful job all by yourself." "Get out," Julian hissed. He was losing control. The guests were staring. "Get out of my wedding!" Dante stood up then. He unfolded to his full height, towering over Julian. The menace in his posture was palpable. "We were just leaving," Dante said. "The food is mediocre and the company is lacking. But before we go, there is one small piece of business." Dante reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a folded document. He dropped it onto the table. It landed next to the centerpiece. "What is this?" Julian asked. "A wedding gift," Dante said. "Or perhaps a severance package." "Open it," Emma urged gently. Julian picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He unfolded it. It was a notification of a hostile takeover bid. "Blackwood Industries is leveraged to the hilt, Julian," Dante said casually, adjusting his cufflinks. "You borrowed against your own stock to pay for this circus, and to fund your new wife's lifestyle. The banks were getting nervous. They sold the debt." "To whom?" Julian croaked. "To us," Emma said. She stood up, smoothing her red dress. "Vance Cassian Holdings. We own your debt, Julian. Which means, technically, we own the venue, the catering, and the company you're planning to IPO next week." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the DJ had stopped the music. "You can't do this," Julian whispered. "It's already done," Emma said. She stepped close to him, so close he could smell her perfume, something dark and spicy. Nothing like the floral scent she used to wear. She leaned into his ear. "You wanted closure, Julian. You wanted to show me what I lost." She pulled back, her eyes flashing with a terrifying triumph. "I didn't lose anything. I just trimmed the fat." She turned to Dante. "Shall we, darling? I'm craving a burger." "After you," Dante said. They walked out. Not a rush, not a flee, a parade. They walked down the center of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past the weeping bride who hadn't realized yet that she had just married a bankrupt man. Julian stood alone at table 1. The document crinkled in his hand, watching the red dress disappear through the double doors. But the story wasn't over. The fallout was just beginning. The silence that Emma and Dante left behind was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. It was a physical weight pressing down on the lungs of everyone in the plaza's grand ballroom. For 10 seconds nobody moved. The DJ, a man named Jax, who usually knew exactly how to read a room, stood with his headphones around his neck looking terrified. The waitstaff froze with trays of champagne, the bubbles sizzling in the quiet. Julian stood by table 1, the document, the death warrant of his career, crumbled in his fist. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple, icy cold. Julian. It was Bianca. She had navigated through the tables, her massive dress knocking over a glass of red wine on a white tablecloth as she came. The stain spread like a gunshot wound, but nobody rushed to clean it. "Julian, what did she mean?" Bianca's voice was high, shrill, bordering on hysteria. "What did she mean she owns the debt? Why did she say she owns the venue?" Julian turned to look at his wife. For the first time he really saw her. He saw the panic in her eyes, not for him, but for the lifestyle she had attached herself to. He saw the layers of makeup cracking under the strain of reality. "It's a bluff," Julian rasped. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "It's a legal maneuver. It's nothing. Silas?" He whipped around looking for his best man, his COO, his fixer. Silas was sitting at the table staring at his phone. His face was gray. "Silas, tell her it's a bluff," Julian demanded, grabbing Silas by the shoulder. Silas looked up. There was no loyalty left in his eyes, only self-preservation. "It's not a bluff, Julian," Silas said, holding up his phone. "It's on Bloomberg. It's on the Wall Street Journal. The headline just dropped: Vance Cassian Holdings acquires majority debt of Blackwood Industries. Hostile takeover imminent." "What?" Julian snatched the phone. There it was. A photo of him, one he hated, where he looked arrogant next to a silhouette of the mysterious owners of Vance Cassian. The article detailed everything. The leveraging. The risky loans he had taken to pump up the stock price artificially before the IPO. The spending. "The stock," Julian muttered. "It's tanking," Silas said ruthlessly. "After-market trading has plunged 40% in the last 10 minutes. By the time the bell rings on Monday morning, your shares will be worth less than the paper napkins on these tables." A gasp rippled through the room. The guests were checking their phones now. The Whisper network was faster than fiber optics. "He's broke. He's finished. She destroyed him." Bianca snatched the phone from Julian's hand. She read the headline, her lips moving silently. Then she looked at Julian. The adoration was gone. The love was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated horror. "You're broke," she whispered. "It's a liquidity issue, Bianca," Julian shouted, losing his composure. "It's temporary. I can fix it." "You leveraged the house," she screeched. "The Hamptons' house. My studio." "Our studio," Julian corrected, but she wasn't listening. Bianca looked around the room. She saw the socialites, the people she had spent years trying to impress, looking at her with pity. Pity was social death for Bianca St. Clair. "I can't believe this," she sobbed, backing away. "You lied to me. You told me you were untouchable. You invited her here. You invited this—" "Bianca, stop making a scene," Julian hissed, reaching for her arm. She slapped his hand away. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. "Don't touch me. I'm not going down with you, Julian. I have a brand to protect." She turned and ran. Not walked, ran. She gathered her massive tulle skirt in her arms and sprinted toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. "Bianca!" Julian yelled. She didn't look back. Julian stood alone in the center of the ruins of his wedding. The guests were already moving. It was a mass exodus. Nobody wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. Senator Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Julian with a mixture of disappointment and distaste. "Senator," Julian pleaded, stepping forward, "please don't leave. We can discuss this. I have a strategy." "Julian," the senator said coldly, "you don't have a strategy. You have a corpse. And frankly insulting Dante Cassian. That was political suicide. The man funds half the lobbies in Washington. Good luck, son." The senator walked out. The investors followed. The friends followed. Within 20 minutes, the grand ballroom was empty. Only the staff remained. The maitre d' approached Julian, who was sitting on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. "Mr. Blackwood," the maitre d' said, his tone no longer obsequious but strictly business. "What?" Julian snapped. "The credit card we have on file for the final payment of the reception. It was declined." Julian looked up. "Run it again." "We ran it 3 times, sir. The bank has frozen the assets associated with Blackwood Industries." Julian laughed. It was a broken, manic sound. Of course they had. Emma knew. She had timed it perfectly. She let him incur the cost, let him eat the cake, and then cut off the stomach before he could digest it. "Send the bill to Vance Cassian Holdings," Julian said, standing up and swaying slightly. "My ex-wife is paying." He loosened his tie, the tie Emma had mocked, and threw it on the floor. He walked out of the Plaza Hotel into the cool New York night. It was raining. He didn't have an umbrella. His limo was gone. The driver had likely been notified that the corporate account was suspended. He stood on the curb, wet, drunk, and married to a woman who had already left him destroyed by a woman he thought he had broken. But Julian Blackwood was a fighter, or so he told himself. Monday, he thought, watching the taillights of a taxi fade into the mist. Monday, I take it back. I built that company. I am the company. They can't run it without me. He was wrong. Monday morning in the financial district was usually a symphony of ambition. For Julian, it felt like a funeral march. He hadn't slept. He had spent the weekend in a hotel room paid for with cash he had in his wallet, calling every board member, every ally, every lawyer he knew. Nobody answered. He arrived at Blackwood Tower at 8 a.m. sharp. He wore a fresh suit, though his eyes were bloodshot and dark circles bruised the skin beneath them. He marched through the glass revolving doors, ready to scream, ready to fight. The security guard at the front desk was new. He didn't look up when Julian swiped his badge at the turnstile. Beep, 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 red light. Julian swiped again. Beep, 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 red light. "Machine's broken," Julian muttered, trying to push through the barrier. "ID, please," the guard said, stepping out of the booth. He was a large man blocking the path. "I'm Julian Blackwood. I own this building. Open the gate." "Mr. Blackwood," the guard said, checking a clipboard. "I have instructions to escort you to the 40th floor. Visitor pass only." "Visitor," Julian's voice cracked. "I'm the CEO." "Not according to this list, sir. Please don't make me call the NYPD." The threat hung in the air. Julian swallowed his pride. He took the sticky visitor badge and slapped it onto his lapel. The elevator ride was silent. The other employees in the car stared at their shoes, terrified to make eye contact with the dead man walking. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, executive management, the atmosphere was different. The Blackwood Industries logo on the wall behind the reception desk had already been removed. In its place was a temporary banner under management of Vance Cassian. It had been less than 48 hours. The efficiency was terrifying. Sarah, his assistant of 5 years, was packing a box at her desk. She looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." "Where are they?" Julian demanded. "Conference room B. The board is all there." Julian marched down the hallway. He didn't knock. He threw the double glass doors open. The long oak table was full. Every member of the board of directors was present. Silas was there, sitting at the far end, refusing to look at Julian. And at the head of the table, his chair, sat Emma. She wasn't wearing red today. She was wearing a sharp navy blue power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She looked every inch the corporate raider. To her right sat Dante Cassian, leaning back in his chair, playing with a Mont Blanc pen. "You're late," Emma said, checking her watch. "The meeting started at 8. "Get out of my chair," Julian snarled, striding forward. "Sit down, Julian," Dante said. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Julian in his tracks. "There's a folding chair for you over there." He pointed to a metal chair set up against the wall away from the table. Julian looked at the board members. "You're letting this happen. After everything I did for this company, I built this from a garage." "And you almost buried it in a grave of debt," spoke up Marcus Heavy, the chairman of the board. "We've seen the books, Julian. The creative accounting, the personal loans disguised as business expenses. It's fraud, Julian. Borderline at best." "I was going to pay it back after the IPO," Julian defended. "There is no IPO," Emma said calmly. She opened a folder in front of her. "Vance Cassian has taken the company private. We bought out the shareholders at a premium this morning. They were very happy to sell, considering the news of your mismanagement." She slid a paper across the long table. It slid perfectly, stopping right at the edge near Julian. "What is this, your resignation?" Emma said, effective immediately. "And if I don't sign, then we release the full audit to the SEC," Dante interjected. "Federal prison is not pleasant this time of year, Julian. White-collar crime gets you a minimum security camp, sure, but the reputation damage. You'll never run a lemonade stand again." Julian looked at the paper. Then he looked at Emma. "Why?" he asked. The fight was draining out of him. "Why go to this length? You had the money. You had the life. Why come back just to burn me down?" Emma stood up. She walked around the table, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. She stopped in front of him. "You think this is about you leaving me?" Emma asked softly. "You think I'm a scorned woman acting on emotion?" She shook her head almost pityingly. "This isn't personal, Julian. It's strictly business. You see the Phoenix, my algorithm. It doesn't just predict stock trends. It predicts leadership failure." The room was dead silent. "I ran the simulation on you 3 years ago," she continued. "The data showed that your ego would eventually outpace your competence. The model predicted exactly when you would over-leverage. It predicted the exact week you would be most vulnerable to a takeover." She leaned in close. "I didn't destroy you, Julian. The math did. I just waited for the variable to equal 0. Julian stared at her. It was the ultimate humiliation. She hadn't just beaten him. She had calculated his failure years in advance. He wasn't a rival to her. He was a statistic. A glitch she had corrected. "Sign the paper," Emma said, straightening up. "And you can keep the townhouse. I'm not cruel. I just don't want you running my company." "My company." The words echoed in his head. Julian picked up the pen. His hand shook violently. He signed his name. It was a scribble, a surrender. "Good," Emma said. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned back to the table. "Sarah will have your personal effects boxed up downstairs. Security will escort you out." "Emma," Julian said, his voice broken. "What about us? The past?" She stopped. She didn't turn around. "The past is a sunk cost, Julian. I wrote it off years ago." She sat back down in the CEO's chair. "Next item on the agenda," she announced to the board, effectively erasing him from the room. Dante gave Julian a small dismissive wave. 2 security guards appeared at Julian's elbows. They weren't rough, but they were firm. They guided him out of the boardroom, out of the executive suite, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, Julian caught one last glimpse of Emma. She was laughing at something the chairman said, pointing to a graph on the screen. She looked powerful. She looked happy. The elevator descended. Julian walked out of the building. The rain had stopped, but the sun was blinding. He stood on the sidewalk of Wall Street, people rushing past him, oblivious to the man who had just lost the world. He checked his phone. One notification, a text from Bianca. "My lawyer will be in touch. Don't contact me." Julian Blackwood put the phone in his pocket. He took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of exhaust and hot dog water. He had started with nothing. He had ended with nothing. But the story wasn't quite done with him yet. Because while Julian had lost his empire, he had gained something far more dangerous, a nothing-to-lose mentality. And as he stood there watching the sleek black town car, Emma's car, pull out of the underground garage, a dark thought began to form in the shattered remnants of his mind. But that is a story for another time. 6 months had passed since the wedding that never really ended. New York City moved on quickly. That was the nature of the beast. The city was a shark that had to keep swimming or die. Scandals that felt earth-shattering in June were forgotten by December. But for Julian Blackwood, time had frozen. He sat in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, the kind with a radiator that hissed like a dying snake, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The townhouse was gone, seized to pay off the remaining personal guarantees he had signed during his manic spending spree. The cars were gone. The friends were gone. He was currently working as a remote consultant for a mid-tier logistics firm in Ohio. They didn't know who he was, or rather, they didn't care. To them, he was just a voice on Zoom who knew a lot about supply chains. On his desk, a folding card table, sat a copy of Forbes magazine. The cover was striking. It was a black and white portrait of a woman looking directly into the lens. Her chin tilted up, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Emma Vance. The Algorithm of Revenge. How the silent genius behind Vance Cassian redefined corporate warfare. Julian stared at the photo. She looked beautiful. Not the flashy, desperate beauty of Bianca, but something timeless. Beside her in the feature spread was Dante Cassian, looking at her not with possession, but with reverence. Julian flipped the page. There was an interview. Interviewer. Many people say your takeover of Blackwood Industries was personal. Was it, Emma? Everything in business is personal. People build companies. People break them. If you ignore the human element, you fail. My predecessor ignored the human element. He thought numbers were the only truth. But numbers are just a reflection of behavior. Julian threw the magazine across the room. It hit the wall and slid down Emma's face, still staring at him. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Hello," Julian answered, his voice rough. "Julian?" He froze. He would recognize that shrill, demanding voice anywhere. "Bianca. I didn't think you'd pick up," she said. She sounded different, smaller. "I need help, Julian." "Help?" Julian laughed, a dry barking sound. "You left me at the reception, Bianca. You filed for annulment 3 days later. You cited fraud as the reason." "I had to," she cried. "My reputation was tanking. I lost my brand deals, but it didn't work. They still associate me with you. Nobody will hire me. I'm living with my parents in Jersey." "Welcome to the club," Julian muttered. "I was thinking," Bianca continued, her voice trembling, "maybe we could do an interview, a tell-all. We could say Emma manipulated us. We could say she stole the company. We could play the victims. The press loves a redemption arc." Julian closed his eyes. He thought about it. For a moment, the old Julian, the schemer, the wolf, clawed at his chest. He could drag Emma through the mud. He could lie. He could scream until someone listened. But then he looked at the Forbes magazine on the floor. He remembered the way Dante Cassian had looked at him in the boardroom, like he was a folding chair. "No," Julian said. "What Julian? It's our only chance. She won, Bianca, Julian said quietly. She didn't just beat us. She outclassed us. If we go to the press, she won't even sue us. She'll just release the data. She'll show the world exactly how incompetent I was and how greedy you were. She has the receipts. She always has the receipts. So you're just going to give up? Bianca screeched. You're a coward. No, Julian said, looking around his empty apartment. I'm just finally doing the math. He hung up the phone and blocked the number. Meanwhile, in the penthouse office of the newly christened Vance Tower, Emma stood by the window looking out over the sprawling metropolis of Manhattan. The office had been gutted. The dark mahogany and leather of Julian's era were gone, replaced by sleek glass living walls of greenery and open light. It felt like a sanctuary, not a fortress. You're brooding, a deep voice said. Emma turned. Dante was leaning against the doorframe holding 2 espressos. I'm not brooding. She smiled, taking the cup he offered. I'm reflecting. On the article, Dante nodded toward the magazine on her desk. They called you the Iron Rose. A bit dramatic, don't you think? I like it, Emma said, sipping the coffee. It has thorns. Dante walked over and stood beside her. He placed a hand on her waist, pulling her gently against him. We have the gala tonight, the Metropolitan Museum. Everyone is waiting to see the new Queen of New York. I'm not a queen, Dante, Emma murmured, looking at the city lights flickering on. Queens inherit their power. I built mine. True. Dante kissed her temple. But there is one loose end. Oh. Bianca St. Clair came to the lobby today. Emma raised an eyebrow. Did she? She wanted to see you. She brought a resume. She applied for the receptionist position. Emma laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh. You're joking. Dead serious. She said she's willing to start from the bottom. What did security do? They were about to throw her out. Dante said, a mischievous glint in his eye. But I told them to wait for your call. Emma thought about it. She thought about the woman who had sneered at her, who had spent Julian's money on flowers while Emma was building an empire in silence. Hire her, Emma said. Dante blinked. Excuse me? Hire her, Emma repeated. But not as a receptionist. We need someone to manage the recycling program in the basement. It pays minimum wage. If she really wants to start from the bottom, let her start there. Dante grinned, shaking his head. Remind me never to cross you, Emma Vance. You already know better. Emma turned back to her desk. There, sitting in a simple silver frame, was the object that had started it all. It was the invitation. Come see what happiness actually looks like. Julian's handwriting was scrawled on the back. Most people would have burned it. Most people would have torn it to shreds in a fit of rage. But Emma had framed it. It wasn't a trophy of war. It was a reminder. It was a reminder that underestimation is the greatest weapon a woman can wield. Julian had looked at her and seen a gardener, a librarian, a boring wife. He hadn't bothered to look deeper. He hadn't realized that while he was playing checkers, she was designing the board. Are you ready? Dante asked, checking his watch. The limo is downstairs, and this time it's not a rental. Emma picked up her clutch. She ran her finger over the glass of the frame one last time. Yes, she said, turning off the lights in the office, leaving the invitation in the dark. I'm ready. She walked out of the office, her heels clicking on the marble, a sound that echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. The elevator doors closed, sealing the past away for good. Julian was in Queens, staring at a wall. Bianca was in the basement sorting paper from plastic. And Emma was just getting started. And that is how Emma Vance turned a cruel prank into a billion-dollar empire. Julian Blackwood wanted to show his ex-wife what she had lost, but in the end he only succeeded in showing the world exactly who he really was. It's a brutal reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the ones you should fear the most, Because while you're making noise, they're making plans. What do you think? Did Emma go too far by taking his entire company and leaving him with nothing? Or did Julian get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your take in the comments below. Was this justice or was it cruelty? If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new dramas every week. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.